Good evening, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for attending Laurier's Milton Lecture Series, and welcome to our March lecture. This season and this series story runs the second Wednesday of the month from October to May at 7 p.m. So welcome back. We are so glad to have you. My name is Carolyn, and I work for Wilfrid Laurier University, and we are so proud to be partners with the Milton Public Library on this incredible series. It's been many, many years. Some quick housekeeping for you all this evening. You've been muted on entry with videos turned off. We do have time carved out for questions. So if you have them, you can use the Ask a Question function at the bottom. The lecture is being recorded and will be shared via email by the library in the near future. It's in case you want to watch it again. And before we begin the program, I just wanted to share that we would like to acknowledge that Wilfrid Laurier University and its campuses are located on the shared traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. And today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We recognize, honor, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and the water on which Laurier is now present. Perhaps you're joining us from another location this evening, and if that's the case, I would encourage you to take a moment to reflect and acknowledge the traditional territories in which you reside. Acknowledging this reminds us of our important connection to this land where we live, learn, and work. I am excited to introduce tonight's topic and speaker. From stigmatized stoners to enlightened explorers, how product design is revolutionizing the cannabis market. Dr. Sarah Wilner is an associate professor of marketing and Laurier brand chair. Her research looks at the intersection of marketing management and consumer behavior, and particularly focuses on product innovation and design, brand management, and consumer culture. Originally trained as an anthropologist, she examines marketplace symbols and meanings to understand how businesses influence our lives and how culture influences business. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us this evening. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction, and I appreciate being invited tonight. I'm quite excited to share some of this work with a diverse audience. It's important to me that the work that we do in the ivory tower of the university gets shared. And hopefully this is a topic that is of interest to more of you than would normally read one of the journals that we publish this kind of work in. So tonight I'm going to give you some very top line cursory introduction to a study that some colleagues and I did that actually began a while ago, and I'll talk about that momentarily, about the cannabis market. So again, similar to the introduction that I just had, just a little bit about me. These are the topics that I tend to study. And it is a particularly provocative topic to be studying. I often, while I was working on this in my office at the university, would wonder if the IT people would think, what is she doing? If anybody was listening in on all the searches I was doing about the cannabis industry and wondering if I was indeed doing research, but indeed I was. This is a study that I conducted with two colleagues, one at Oregon State, who is actually a Canadian co-author of mine who graduated from the Ivy School at Western, but happens to be working in Oregon now, and Dr. Ashley Humphreys, who's at Northwestern University. We started the study, as I will show you shortly, in 2014, but it was just published in 2021. And part of that has to do with the amount of time we spent conducting the study, and part of that just has to do with the publication process. So some of this material is a bit older, but I've remained interested in the topic. And of course, the Canadian context has been changing along the way. So our research question was, how can the design of a product that was previously stigmatized be changed because of some attributes about the products in the marketplace themselves. So in this case, moving from a category that was illegal, this was one of the questions that my colleagues and I had in 2014 when the recreational cannabis market became legal in Colorado. On New Year's Eve, in 2013, we had a dangerous drug that was illegal that nobody would talk about. And, the next morning, the market was wide open. So this is, although it's as I say, maybe a controversial topic and maybe a provocative topic to be talking about studying drugs and the sale of drugs and the design of drugs. This is not a personal category of interest to me. We as academics think much more in the abstract, and we think much more about the context of what we wanted to understand was what happens when a product that is stigmatized changes, in this case, because of legal regulation. How does that actually change in the consumer environment? What does that do to actually the people within the marketplace, like consumers, and the people designing products, which are the producers? So again, if we think about this as a category, when I say marijuana or weed or pot or any of the words we used to use for this product, this substance, probably I've written some terms at the bottom of this image. These might be some of the associations you might have had, you might still have. But certainly, because cannabis as a good, as a substance, has been delegitimized, was illegal in North America since at least about 100 years now. In the US, it became illegal in 1911. So there are a lot of associations with it as a product, some of them about being dangerous. Certainly it was illegal, but we also have other associations, and that was kind of in the introduction to this talk about, if you think about who the consumer is, why would somebody consume marijuana? And it's often this image of this stoner dude, lives in his parents' basement, is lazy, self-absorbed, plays video games all day. And a lot of these images come from popular media, right? So we have Fast Times at Ridgemont High or Pineapple Express. We have lots and lots of popular culture in which people who consume this good are seen as, not ideal citizens in some sense. So we understood that the evening of December 31st, 2013, most of the population, whether they felt that way about the substance or not, understood that that was a common association for marijuana. And the very next day, how do marketers, how do producers try to immediately change the understanding and the ideas that here I have written? Fear and distaste might be fear if you are a consumer that you're going to be arrested or discovered, or it might just be distaste for a substance that people have negative associations for. In this image, I have this guy who is smoking, or he's using a water pipe, which we spent an enormous amount of time as in North America trying to get people to stop smoking cigarettes, that we understood that inhaling smoke was bad for our health. How do we take this product that lots of people avoid for any number of reasons and try to make it meaningful? So that's where we started. Before I jump into what the study was and some of these issues, it's incredibly important that I differentiate between the marketplace and the context in the US from Canada. And so as Canadians, you're well aware of probably some of the legislation that's taken place. But the study that we conducted that I'm going to tell you about took place in the US for a very specific reason. And that is the way that cannabis has been regulated and made legal. So in the US, nationally, cannabis is still an illegal substance. It is still a Category 1 drug. And from the federal level, if you are caught with the substance, you can be arrested. What that means in practice is very practical issues for cannabis producers, like using banks, because banks are federally operated. It's very difficult for certain companies to be able to trade in a marketplace because they can't use national banks. What has happened in the US instead is state by state, recreational cannabis has been legalized, usually by voters through new voting bylaws, for example. The first among those were Colorado and Washington State in 2012, but the marketplace didn't open as early as 2012. It was the end of that year, and stores and those kinds of things didn't begin to open until 2014. Differently, very differently, as you may know, in the Canadian context, cannabis was legalized federally, so across the nation all at once, not province by province, in 2018. And it was only the second country in the world to do that, and so it was quite brave. And laws are made at the national level, and this is important. I'll show you shortly, because it changes what products are sold, how they're sold, and how they're represented in the marketplace. So our study took place specifically in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon from 2014, when the market opened for 2 of those states, to 2019. So I'll tell you a little bit more about it. But the reason I mention this again is that I'm going to be talking about product design, packaging, product format. I can't really talk about the Canadian context, even though we are one of the only nations where this is nationally legal. You would think that that would allow an enormous amount of new business and commerce to take place in this category. But I think, in fact, because it was made legal at the national level, the government has been very, very conservative about things like packaging and product format. So I have an image on the screen showing you some of what is known as the plain packaging laws that govern, these are templates that govern how cannabis is sold in Canada right now. And as you can tell, it has more in common with no-name products than it does with some of your favorite consumer packaged goods. You know, potato chips have cooler looking packages than this stuff. And that is very, very purposeful. So because this was made legal at the national level, and regulations would be had to be monitored and enforced, it was much easier for the government, I would argue, to be conservative and not try to, or not allow formats and interest and persuasion that we normally see in the marketplace, to really limit that, so that they could begin to very conservatively understand how opening this market was going to affect consumers. It's not to say that in the US there are not a lot of laws and policies governing what can be sold, how it can be sold, and what packaging looks like. But you're going to see momentarily that what I'm showing you on the screen now is very different from what I'm about to show you. I should also just take a moment and differentiate between, when I keep talking about recreational cannabis, this is not medical cannabis that has been legal for much longer in many different places, where people with diseases and other medical issues like cancer are treated using, or post-traumatic stress disorder, are treated using cannabis. This is recreational cannabis, describes something very similar to what we would have with alcohol. So consumers of a certain age, similar to alcohol, have access in controlled environments, like in Ontario, the LCBO. So not all consumers can enter. You have to be of a certain age. You have limitations to what you can buy. But unlike alcohol, which, you know, wine and beer and all kinds of hard liquors, as you know, are given very persuasive brands and lots of interesting formats to make you want to consume them and enjoy the associations with those products. That's not happening in Canada right now. So all of the material I'm going to show you, all of the brands, all of the products, are only in the United States. And in fact, only in the states where they are legal. So just a really top line, what the study was, we looked at a number of different sources of data. We started off looking at mainstream media just to see what the conversation was, just to confirm in many ways that what was happening around cannabis, the idea of becoming more legitimate, was in fact happening. So as states began to legalize the access to purchase and use of cannabis, we saw stories in newspapers, magazines, all kinds of online media go from talking about this product as weed, as pot, as these are all really derogatory words, to start replacing that language with, as you've been hearing me talk about, the botanical name for this, which is cannabis. So the emphasis on this is a plant. This is not a weed. This is not weeds are plants. Weeds are plants as well. But the idea that it's not something dirty and disgusting, but it's a natural form. We saw people stop talking about stoners and start talking about wellness. So we actually saw the language around this entire product category start to shift over time. We talked to producers. We talked to the new companies that the moment they heard the marketplace was going to open, rightly saw a bit of a gold rush, thought this is a really interesting opportunity to get in the very opening of the market and start to sell something that we know, there has always been demand for and there has always been consumption of. So when I talk about this, I will often say, although this has been an illegal substance for most of the last century, I don't know about you, but I don't know of any high schools where people don't have access to this substance, or universities for sure, for that matter. This has been a black market for a long time. And interesting to me, although we don't hear reports about that its danger per se, we know a lot more about the impact that things like drunk driving have. We still have legalized long ago alcohol consumption, but for some reason cannabis was felt to be much more dangerous. So we have an unusual situation in a marketplace where there are a lot of people who are actually quietly, secretly familiar with this product, whether because they consume it or just because they knew it was around, for example, as I've given at universities, and yet still don't talk about it, still don't actively and openly participate in consumption. So we talked to the producers, the people who were going to start working on products and start selling them. We talked to, we looked at those products. We did a visual analysis to understand what different packaging and imagery that was used on the packages meant. And then we talked to consumers themselves. We did a survey of university students who were a keen target market to understand how what they were well aware of and had access to in illegal ways, how that might change once the market was open to a legal purchase and consumption. And then we talked to consumers of all different walks of life, all different ages, and all different experiences with the drug. So here I have listed lapsed users, people who maybe 20 years ago when they were in university had used cannabis but had not since. People with no experience whatsoever, no matter what their age. And then heavy users, expert users, people who were common and frequent users of cannabis previously on the black market, to understand what does this product look like, feel like, what does it mean to you, how do you use it, and how will legalization potentially have changes and bring differences to bear. So I just thought I'd show you in a snapshot, just so we can get rolling with the whole idea of this. Cannabis then, so if I said marijuana, pot, weed, maybe this is an image that would come to mind immediately. I don't know if this one would. This is what cannabis, one form of cannabis, looks like now. And yes, it's a bath bomb. And yes, it contains the active psychotropic substances within cannabis, which are THC and CBD. So no, you don't eat this and you don't smoke it. You take a bath with it just like any other bath bomb. But our understanding of this good, of this product, has begun to change. So it's not only used for mood change, mood alteration now. It's also used for this purpose that most bath bombs are, which is relaxation. That the chemical compounds in this substance also dilate and warm different cells in the body so that it's relaxing in the same way that another kind of soothing bath product might be. But more to the point, whether it works and is effective in certain ways or not, I just wanted to show you the stark contrast between what we think about as a market and how the marketplace was thinking about, oh, marijuana is going to be legal, what will happen? And what marijuana looks like today, how the market has actually adapted, and how that has changed how consumers have begun to think about and interact with this product. So really top line, to get to the heart of it, and then I'll give you some examples of this. What did we learn from this whole study? We learned that by changing modes, like moving from a cigarette, a joint that you would smoke cannabis, to something like a bath bomb, that kind of, what I'm referring to those as, what I'm saying is a format change, and some of the packaging creates a new access to this product. What I've said here on the slide is that it's both emotional and physical. It changes whether we think about this as I had on the slide with the young man, whether this is dangerous and sketchy and worrisome and dirty and for lazy people, or whether it's indulgent and calming and enjoyable, and how we might associate something, again, like a glass of wine, rather than as something that you'd be buying with a Ziploc bag from some stranger on a corner. So we're arguing that those new formats and packaging, the kind of branding that is done, has changed how we feel emotionally and physically about this product category. And those in turn enable legitimacy. So in the academic literature, we know there are basically 3 pillars to legitimacy. One of them is regulatory. That is whether or not something is legally accessible or not. And when cannabis became legal in the US, in those states, it attained regulatory legitimacy. That didn't mean that it attained 2 other forms of legitimacy, one of which is what we call normative legitimacy. And that is whether or not you are comfortable talking to other people about the fact that you are consuming cannabis. Is that a good or a category that people would assume, if I was feeling a certain way or craving something specific, it would be normal, so it's normative, to consume that good. So if I say, when I'm making a nice dinner tonight, I'm going to serve wine, that has a normative legitimacy. Someone would probably not be shocked unless I was part of a specific religious community, for example. The third category for legitimacy is what we call sociocultural legitimacy. And that has more to do with when I'm considering my options for any kind of thing to participate in, to consume, is this one of the things that comes to mind? So I'd like to go out and have a nice time with my friends. What are my options? I could go have dinner. I could go to a movie. I could go to a bar and have a drink. Would cannabis previously have come to mind? And what we know is that previously, even when the regulatory legitimacy was achieved, even when it became legal, that didn't mean that everybody felt as though it was normal or socially acceptable, because of the number of years and the way that the category had been thought about and talked about before. So when we change the product form and when we change our orientation to it, it provides all 3 forms of legitimacy. So as I say on the slide, having different kinds of formats provides different usage occasions that are possible, different opportunities to consume this as a product, and actually, almost more importantly, reframes what consuming this product says about you and how comfortable you feel about that. So that's the top line, that changing the design of the product does change the meaning of the product for us. So let me just give you some quick examples of that. Again, not all of them related to mood or psychotropic change. So for example, if you use cannatherapy shampoo, you will not get high, you will not be intoxicated. Nevertheless, the producers of this product feel as though it has benefits for your hair, and that it like any other herbal, if you add lavender to shampoo, people will enjoy the smell. They might enjoy some of the properties of lavender. That the same would be true for the shampoo. Again, once this stops being something frightening, dangerous, illegal, no, it's a shampoo. It changes how we feel about it as something that is possible and reasonable to consume. The image in the middle is from a company called Dixie Elixirs. They're based in Colorado. They were one of the first companies to really come out with a consumer packaged good related to the cannabis category. And this is their product called One, and it's kind of like a sports drink. And you might have guessed that just looking at the format, because it looks kind of like soft drinks. It doesn't look like a drug. It doesn't look like something dangerous. What that means is you might be more comfortable purchasing it and consuming it. It probably also means you're going to consume it publicly. Different states have different laws regulating where and how you can consume this kind of product. But if you were serving this at a family barbecue, it might not feel as strange as if you were lighting up a water pipe if you were needed to smoke a cigarette, if you were using what's called a dabbing rig, some other formats for traditional cannabis consumption. That's just you're sipping a beverage like any other soft drink, and it happens to contain THC, so it does intoxicate. The dose has been controlled, and that has been those levels have been determined, for example, by the state of Colorado in this case. The image on the far right, I wanted to not just show things that are consumed, but also devices that are used. This is the PAX brand vaporizer. So you can use a cannabis oil cartridge to vaporize cannabis. This is probably the closest product format to traditional use. It's the closest to smoking is this idea of vaping. Not surprisingly, maybe might not surprise you, the designers of this product previously worked at Apple. And it certainly shares some of those aesthetics, I think. It's a very clean, lined, and sophisticated brushed metal, soft designs. That doesn't quite feel like the water pipe I showed you of the young man in the basement. And certainly, and I'll show you some input from consumers we got on this, this was a really important distinction. In part because some of those water pipes or bongs, as they're known, are glass. They're difficult to carry. They're not something you put in your pocket. So this creates an accessibility to be able to consume the product in different spaces and contexts. But also the fact that it looks like a USB key, it's about that big, that it's elegant looking. It really changes what the consumer and people who are observing the consumer are interpreting as what that consumption means and what it looks like. So here's another product I'll just be showing you in the context of all of this, a range of different products on the marketplace. These are small bites of chocolate, as you might see in any other snack size chocolate format, except again, this is containing the chemicals found in cannabinoids that are in cannabis. But here's a quote from one of the consumers we talked to as part of this study. Sammy's 39, he has 2 little kids, he's married, he's an engineer, he's an upstanding citizen. And he says, I use cannabis every 6 times a year, every couple months, I get in the mood to consume this. And what he was telling us when we talked to him was, we said, are there any times that you have consumed cannabis since it became legal? And he said, well, yeah, this past Christmas, I bought an edible. And he did that specifically. These are his words. I won't read them all, but to paraphrase, he said, I wanted to do that because it was Christmas and we had guests coming. And I was not going to remove myself from the festivities and go into my garage and smoke a joint and come back in the house and stink. So he says, I can have my wine and have my wife entertain the kids while I go outside and smoke a joint, but then I come in and I stink. And my kids are going to say, why do you stink? And my wife doesn't really mind it, but my daughter would ask me questions and I don't want to lie to her. So you can see he's really conflicted as a consumer. He consumed cannabis before it became legal, but now that it's legal and there are these alternative formats for him to engage in, he enjoys being able to consume this as a product in ways that he not only enjoys because it's chocolate, but are also removing what marketers often call pinch points, or pain points, these things like smoking, smelling, where do I store this? Do I need to be able to transport special devices to be able to consume the product? That's been taken away. It's a bite of chocolate. He doesn't have to leave the house. He doesn't have to infringe on other people like his wife. Can you watch the kids while I disappear for a while and consume this medication or this drug? So you can see here exactly what we're talking about, changing this to a format which feels normal. I'm in the mood for a piece of chocolate. I'm just going to indulge in a moment and have a piece of chocolate. It makes me feel good. And I don't have to remove myself from a social setting. So in fact, one of our big findings was what the marketplace started to do, what producers and their designers started to do, was deeply mimic existing products in the marketplace. They immediately removed themselves from the associations with smell, with smoke, with some of the elements that made the product less desirable or infringed on other people's, like secondhand smoke. Again, the smell of the skunky smell that comes when you ignite the cannabis botanical flower. So Dixie has a product that's on the far left that is really like an energy drink. And the format is made to look like and feel like a 5-hour energy, because it's meant to not only mimic it in form, but also mimic it in association. Do you know how 5-hour energy works? You take a small amount of liquid and it gives you a caffeine boost. It gives you energy. It makes you feel alive. So does Dixie, would argue. So does their Lift product. It's a booster. It works, functions the same way. The company wants you to think of them as similar and related categories, even though one is restricted. You cannot buy it at a convenience store. You have to be of a certain age. So surely many of the aspects of the category are different, but by creating product formats and designs that really look like other normal mainstream products, we begin to reorient consumers toward them. In the middle, we have a Body Shop body butter. And below we have Apothecana, which also makes health and beauty good, not intoxicating, with a body butter, a play on the idea of the cannabis bud. And so it has shea butter, it has calendula, it has mango butter, it has all these wonderful things that you see in lotions and creams in the mainstream marketplace, like the Body Shop. Oh, and by the way, it also has cannabis, right? And it's not, as I say, it's not a mistake that it looks exactly like the jar and the size and the scale, and the lotion itself is a similar texture and consistency. The association is meant to be there. And finally, although we've often heard people talk about edibles in the cannabis space and, a pot brownie, how to hide those kinds of intoxicating substances in baked goods. Now, and I'll show you some other examples, the product forms, they do look like a Lindt chocolate bar. Kiva makes this, categorizes this as medical cannabis, but it's sold in dispensaries alongside the recreational products. It doesn't have to be a prescription. So you can see that it's easy to associate them with a mainstream product. And that not only makes it maybe more convenient to consume, but also changes our own emotions and our own anxieties about consuming this product category. One that you might not have thought about, you might have thought, okay, well, I know about pot brownies, so it's not surprising to me that they have chocolate bars. You might not have thought about something like a transdermal patch. So if you don't know what a transdermal patch is, you might still have heard of Nicorette, and that's a smoking cessation patch that you wear on your arm, and the medication in that, it's giving you small amounts of the nicotine as you're withdrawing, as you're trying to quit smoking. It's allowing your body to absorb small amounts of nicotine so that you can wean yourself off of cigarettes behaviorally as well as chemically. So there's a company called Mary's Medicinals that has created a transdermal patch for cannabis. So it does have the intoxicating effects of cannabis, but it is a colorless, odorless, adhesive patch, just like a Band-Aid that you wear under your clothing. So what does that mean? It means you can be wearing one at work. It means you can, this is not about, it's now happy hour, I'm after work, I've gone to a bar, now it's time to indulge. It means that people can be wearing these privately, consuming this good at any time, in any setting. And even if it was visible, if you could see somebody wearing the patch, somebody might think it was a smoking cessation patch like Nicorette. More importantly for us, though, in our analysis is what I have in that middle column, is that it reframes cannabis as not something dangerous and something unhealthy like smoking, but it makes us think about Band-Aids, which are for healing. It makes us think about remedies. It's no mistake that the company is called Mary's Medicinals. Even though it's not medical cannabis, it's recreational cannabis, they want you to think about this product as something healthy and about wellness. You don't have to worry about storing, little batches of flour in special jars. It's in a sealed packet. Your kids are not going to stumble upon this and think it's a treat. It's you could put it in your medicine cabinet. It's very discreet. It's private. As I say, it removes things like smell. And so it's easy to use. And now we think about it more as something about wellness than about something dangerous. Even if you're not familiar with smoking and smoking cessation, I'll bet you drink coffee, or at least know people who drink coffee. And certainly probably in your workplace or at home, you might have a single-use coffee machine. And so, yes, there are K-cups for cannabis. So this is coffee. It does make a cup of coffee. It just happens to also be infused with THC, with cannabis. A number of different brands make them. And here you can see Tabitha, who's a 42-year-old small business owner. She has young kids. She hasn't touched cannabis since she was in university. She outgrew it. She thought, this is not for me. I don't smoke. I don't want to get high. And then in our interviews, we would show consumers prompts. We would show them packages and of some of the products on the market and say, what do you think when you see a package like this? And so you can see she's kind of surprised by it. She says, I wonder how many people use this. It's so inconspicuous. I could have this coffee pods in my kitchen. I don't think it would be a big deal. I don't have to notice. Nobody would notice. My kids wouldn't notice. It's different than the pods I already use. And most importantly, you notice she talks about her mother. Even my mother wouldn't notice. Hey, she might even try one. One of the things that we find in this study is it's particularly interesting which categories. It's not any category. So the smoking cessation patch relates to people who understand smoking. And in the case of coffee, I think you can take the leap to say, well, what is coffee? It's a stimulant. It changes your mood. You have it when you need to change your mood or your level of energy, or you might use it to relax, like after a dinner party and you serve coffee after a meal with dessert. We already think about coffee. It is a drug. We already think about it, though, as an acceptable drug. And so bringing cannabis into spaces where we're already familiar with the main idea of what they do, like change our mood, make us feel calm, make us feel engaged, that's not such a stretch to what trying to get new or lapsed consumers to understand. That's what cannabis does too. You don't need to be afraid of it. It's not that different from coffee. Similarly, just the different formats that are chosen. In this case on the right, I am showing you a tincture, botanical oil, cedar. It's just an essential oil that people use to maybe make a fragrance in their home, or they might use it in their body for mood, lavender oil, something like that. Same thing, tinctures are being used for cannabis. So our consumer who's 51, hasn't touched cannabis in over 30 years, says, oh, I don't speak, marijuana, but I do speak essential oil. I know what that is. So now if cannabis looks and works and I can feel like I understand it better, if it looks like the essential oils I use in my everyday life. We also learned not just that the changing the format and the design changed how people oriented to it, but we learned that marketers quickly fell into old patterns that we think about consumer segments. So I'll very quickly just show you, it's not just, does cannabis look like other products? We have things like cannabis for women, cannabis for people who love yoga, cannabis for people who love pastries, beautiful products. Here we have, when I say the conventional marketing that we do, like gender, cannabis for feminine cannabis versus a more masculine cannabis. Now, I'm not ascribing that you have to be a certain gender in order to use these products, but you can see very quickly the marketplace adapted to this product category the way they adapt to all kinds of product categories to create specific products for specific target segments. And similarly, lifestyle. Here we have foodies, premium goods, luxury goods. On the left, chocolates infused with cannabis. On the right, a new device. If you have your air fryer and your Instapot, you might also want your Levo herbal infusion so you can make cannabis butters in a beautiful, streamlined way for your cooking. So we learned that consumers with less knowledge were probably more persuaded or hadn't been involved in the category for a long time, especially if it took away some of the problems that with cannabis that were preventing them from re-engaging, like smoke, like smell. And finally, it's not just the product itself, it's also the context of purchase. So this is the one place in Canada where we do have some differentiation, where there is some ability. Dispensaries can have a bit of a brand around where you buy cannabis, even if we can't really change the packaging in Canada yet. So these are examples of, just like you would shop at a different clothing store and find your special niche in any category, the kind of automobile you are attracted to, the kind of clothing you're attracted to here. Also, you would find your kind of segment, your kind of aesthetic when you go shopping for these goods as well. So to wrap up, the design and format of packaging really matter when we're trying to change meanings around a product category. So signaling, it's same as any other consumer good. New products attract certain kinds of consumers, as long as a company can communicate the value proposition clearly. As long as you provide alternative usage occasion and opportunities, these new product forms and designs and formats can overcome people's unwillingness and hesitation to engage in a product category that was once really stigmatized. And they not only help you overcome the stigma, they suggest other ways, like, oh, if it's in a coffee pod, then I might want to consume this at different times of the day or not just after work. So it suggests different ways that we can use the product. And most importantly, reframing the meaning and association so it's not dangerous and it actually, you might consider it for wellness in the case of a bath bomb. So mimicking the product formats and designs of mainstream products really helps to normalize the consumption of a stigmatized product. I will take questions now. I hope that made sense, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Patrico, and I am the manager of branches at the Milton Public Library. Thank you again to everyone who joined us this evening. If you have any questions for Sarah, we're happy to engage in some question and answer. I do see someone has asked a question. It's specific to an ailment, so I'm not sure how in depth we can get into their specific need, but you know, I suppose, how would someone go about if they needed, like a medicinal, they're seeking some type of assistance for ache and pain? What is their best means to really sift through all of the products to find what works best for them?
Well, certainly all of these companies have educational material, have product information on their websites and in their promotional materials. In Canada, certainly a Shoppers Drug Mart, I have noticed my local Shoppers Drug Mart will encourage you to talk to a pharmacist if you have questions about how you might be using cannabis as for a medicinal purpose. So I would probably point you to a family doctor or to your pharmacist.
That's great. I love hearing that even your family doctor would probably be able to steer you in the right direction. But I didn't even know that about that Shoppers Drug Mart. So that's something, learning something new every day. So Curtis is asking, were there any comparisons done on the effectiveness of different forms of marketing along the various customer journeys?
Oh, that's interesting. No, we didn't. That wasn't part of this study. Again, we started the study. I went to Colorado in 2014 as the very moment that the market was opening. So customer journeys were not even something that we were considering at that point. It was more what kinds of formats will emerge if what everybody knew was how to buy the product in an illicit form. How would a mainstream company make decisions about how to reformat it and decide how to position it in the marketplace to make it attractive to consumers? And at that point in particular, the biggest issues were regulatory when you talk about the customer journey, which is how consumers encounter a product and how it works from the moment they buy it to when they dispose of it. There were growing pains early in the marketplace. For example, in Colorado, the Dixie Elixir I showed you that looks like a sport drink, or the original version of that beverage had 10 servings in it. Now, for most of us, I don't know about you, but I have never opened up a small bottle of Pepsi and said, I'm only going to drink 1/10 of this. And how would I measure that anyway? It became really clear that the format of the packaging itself had to change. And so new legislation was introduced. Even things like candy bars, it might say serving size is 1 square, but who stops eating? I don't stop eating 1 square of chocolate. But in this case, because it had intoxication implications, they had to change the packaging. So the second Dixie Elixir I showed you that the bottle was labeled 1, that was 1 serving. So those were some of the customer journey issues that were addressed both by the producers and by the regulators. And all of these are usually in resealable, child-proof packages. There are other issues to make them safe.
Thanks so much. That's really interesting. And Curtis is thanking you here. If anyone has any more questions, we have plenty of time. I did notice in the pictures you were showing. Now, I have never gone into a cannabis store, a store that sells cannabis. However, the pictures you showed, again, you did mention it's mostly a American study. The stores look really posh and upscale compared to kind of what you see driving around in Canada. Is that something that's like emerging here, or is it just the areas?
It is certainly emerging. I would say there's a change. Some of these initially in the Canadian market, licenses were only granted through lottery, and that process has been evolving. I mean, this has been growing and evolving as a category in both the US and Canada, how to best make the category accessible. And there were a number of starts and stops in the Canadian market. And one of them was where to allow dispensaries to open. And then when that kind of licensing changed, all of a sudden we have a proliferation of these dispensaries everywhere now. But there are some that are chains. There's one called Tokyo Smoke that is based in Toronto, but I'm outside of Cambridge, and there's certainly a location near me. And that is a very premium upscale location where they carry not just cannabis, but smoking and use devices that are highly designed. The location in Toronto has an espresso bar in it. It wants to be a Starbucks and a dispensary at the same time. So even in the Canadian market, we do see premium offerings, and retail locations matter.
I mean, they look very inviting. I'm sure I'll pop by one for interest's sakes at some point. Carolyn's asking, are there any marketing trends in this area you think we won't see in Canada? Or is the sky the limit, really?
Well, I mean, the regulatory condition in Canada, I've been waiting since 2018 when it was legalized in Canada, because I had been watching it in the US since 2014, and the categories of goods and formats had just exploded. I was waiting for once the Canadian market, I don't know about you, I don't necessarily follow this incredibly closely in the news, but I haven't heard of any massive health scares. I haven't heard of anybody dying from an overdose. I haven't heard from a major accident caused by intoxication on a motorway. So I was waiting once the government saw that consumption was not something that they had to be as conservative about, that they would open it up and allow different formats. And they have to some extent. Some beverages are now allowed. But the formats that we're seeing here in the States are nowhere near being allowed in the US. We do see Canadian companies like Cannabis doing partnerships and collaborations with American companies. We see it at the corporate level, but not in the retail space here. So I can't predict what will happen in the Canadian space until we see the government change some of the regulations around it. And one piece of that in the US in particular, I showed you formats in particular, but I'm also somebody who studies brands. And what we don't allow in Canada at all is anything about brands. And we know how important brands are to consumers here. You know whether you prefer Coke or Pepsi, and you know whether you are dying to own a Tesla versus a Buick. So brands convey a lot about consumers and a lot about what they mean and what you aspire to. And when that enters this category in Canada, we'll also see some changes if that's ever changed, if the regulations are changed.
Caroline is asking, which country was first to federally legalize cannabis?
Uruguay. Oh. Yeah. So Canada is a particular case because it's the first large, first world nation to really have an impact. And every single year, the legalization increases in the States. I think President Biden is talking about making it national. They all do at some point. But we really do see, and I, for the record, not that it matters, but I'm not a cannabis consumer, but we do see that it's not a dangerous category. This is not something that should be maybe equated with some more dangerous substances in the marketplace. So I would assume regulation will continue to evolve and open up.
As you were speaking, it just makes me think of even my in-laws at one point were talking about CBD oils, and if that would, assist them in their ailments, and that just how in the last 20 years things have changed in the conversation. And this has been such a great presentation.
Thank you. Well, exactly. One of the related plants to the cannabis plant is the hemp plant. And we certainly have seen hemp oil used for cooking. Hemp used to be one of the major crops in North America. It was used to make rope. It was used to make a number of products. It's a whole other story and a whole other history, but the story of why cannabis was delegitimized and made frightening and illegal has a lot to do with some issues that are happening around the world right now, which is immigration. The word marijuana is a Mexican Spanish word, and a lot of what frightened people about that drug was that it came from Mexico and Mexican immigrants. So I'm not imbuing any association with it, but the fear of marijuana was tied to the fear of immigration the same way it is in places like the US right now. And so part of the story of this plant is the changing understanding of and fear of other issues around the plant itself with its own historical context. And we see that actually the new stage beyond cannabis, I have no plans to study it, but we're now seeing psilocybin, the intoxicant components of mushrooms are now becoming legalized, increasingly legalized around the world, and the U.S. is looking at legalization there. There are a number of categories and a number of products that we are re-examining and thinking about our relationship to them and whether or not they can be safe for consumption.
I had no idea about that history, so I'm going to have to unpack that at some point. So Curtis is asking, how can we find the full paper you published on this topic?
I think, Maria, you told me if I provide something, you can post it to the library website. I will warn you that it's a dense academic paper. It may not be as much fun as it sounds to read, but I'm more than happy to post it, and I would be honored if you were interested in reading it. And if there's any piece of it, once you have read it, that you'd like to chat about, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Yes, so we will be sending out a thank you email. So anyone who does not presently receive the Laurier Lecture emails from the Milton Public Library, please do sign up for them, and we will be including some resources from Sarah. Emil, I know you've asked a specific question about CBD ratio for lower back pain, and Sarah did mention it's best to speak to your doctor or a pharmacist for specific ailments, because we wouldn't want to be prescribing anything as some people who are not medical doctors.
Yeah, I mean, certainly what I will say is THC is the intoxicating component. CBD, I think, is accessible to purchase in many different formats in the Canadian marketplace, and that's just something to discuss with a medical professional in particular. I will also say, and I didn't show it on any of the slides here, but it's not just humans that are consuming these. There are a number of CBD-based products for pets, for example. So dog supplements for dogs who are afraid of thunderstorms, for example, that the notion that it is a calming and soothing product has been brought into other categories for other consumers as well.
Yeah, I've seen something like that, and I find we kind of chatted the other day a little bit, but just how common it is to discuss. Oh yeah, I'm just going to have a gummy tonight or something like that. And I hear it was more so like I'm hearing it more common on podcasts or in general discussion as well. It's just become this thing, like you said, like a glass of wine.
Yeah, we may not still discuss it in quite the same way, but I will share. I was telling Maria the other day that I did buy my elderly mother some Martha Stewart CBD gummies because they looked like they came in amazing flavors. I mean, when a mainstream endorser and celebrity, and particularly somebody like Martha Stewart, who we look to for cooking and wellness and housekeeping advice, and she's in her 70s, when she introduces a line of products, and she has a number of products, tinctures and oils, lotions, and gummies. And they have the Martha Stewart feel to them. They're impeccably designed and with select fruits and so forth. Then you know that this has gone mainstream. Then you know that we are conveying a sense of safety and accessibility. I mean, Martha Stewart, who would worry about taking advice from Martha Stewart?
That's a great point. I wonder whether that's our endpoint. Who would fear?
Well, I mean, because others have Snoop Dogg, who is a friend of Martha Stewart's now, has introduced a line. Seth Rogen, Good Canadian, has introduced a line. Many celebrities have introduced their own products, but Martha Stewart has in particular introduced a line of products meant not, I think Snoop Dogg only carries pre-roll kinds of things to smoke as opposed to edibles, things that are more used as supplements, as
refined too, make it more acceptable.
Yeah.
Well, this has been a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much, Wilfrid Laurier. On behalf of Wilfrid Laurier University and the Milton Public Library, thank you, Sarah, for sharing this, all your knowledge and expertise on this topic here this evening. And also thank you to everyone who attended and joined us here tonight. As I mentioned, a copy of tonight's lecture will be available on the Milton Public Library YouTube page in the next few days. And we'll also be sharing links to some resources in our thank you email coming out.
I'll just put my contact information up there again. It was my great pleasure. Thank you all for attending and being interested. And I'm happy to continue the conversation with anyone who would enjoy that.
Absolutely. We'll see if there's any more questions that pop up. And also just to let everyone know, our next lecture will be on April 13th, and the topic will be Partnering for Planetary Health, All Roads Lead to Milton. And that'll be presented by President, Vice Chancellor, and Professor of Biology, Deborah McClatchy. And just taking note, oh, I did see another question come up here. Let me just note that. Okay, so Yamil's just asking again, are there specialists for this topic, or is my family doctor appropriate for any requests? I think
every family doctor, it's not clear exactly what specialization they have had. Some will, for example, have particular expertise in mental health and some do not. And so you would want to start with your family doctor, I would think. But again, a great place to start is at your pharmacy, because those are people who understand medication and how it interacts with your body.
Absolutely. Well, I think that is all the questions we have. Sarah, thank you once more, and all of our attendees, and we wish you a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Good night.
Good night.